We talk in this module about loneliness. We talk about love and relationships and the lack thereof. And in fact, there's a kind of an epidemic of loneliness around the world, particularly among young people. How do you see loneliness in your work as a psychiatrist?
I guess the way I see it most is is that someone can be lonely in a crowded room. And so loneliness is not your proximity to people, but it's your ability to create intimate connections. And we can feel like we have companionship without actually having deep, intimate connections. And these are subtle differences. These are the ability for our mirror neurons to fire when someone else's neurons are firing. It's our ability to feel like we have an understanding of what another person is feeling. The ability to feel safe, that someone else feels and understands what we're feeling. And we've talked in the course about a few different ways to do this with looking into people's eyes. That's one really beautiful way to build that deep intimacy. And through physical touch and connection and oxytocin release. So the biology behind loneliness and the reaction of the body by releasing oxytocin to physical touch and connection and intimacy. It's a really great mechanism that highlights how loneliness can exist.
We have a tendency to think of loneliness as purely a psychological phenomenon, one that's just kind of all in our head and doesn't have these biological roots. What are the telltale signs of loneliness that you see as a clinician?
Telltale signs. You know what? I actually would say, I think I think we could actually do probably a better job asking. I think at least like in a younger age group, I think we do a better job asking about loneliness for, perhaps like senior citizens and that kind of thing. But typically it's actually pretty hard to tell. Lots of young people live by themselves. And generally, are kind of have some like peripheral. I think it's actually pretty hard to tell as a clinician because a lot of what we do is it's self-report in terms of if I ask you a question and you don't tell me the answer, it will probably take a number of other times, a number of other sessions, and perhaps I may kind of garner a few details here and there that might suggest it, but it's pretty hard to so I think it's self-report, and until the person is ready to kind of admit that maybe that's an issue, it's very hard for kind of like an external observer to know.
What is the effect of loneliness on the human brain?
Well, I think in terms of longer term, there have been studies and showing that it can even kind of like overall affect the length of life. There's often like chronic kind of low level inflammatory responses or increases in cortisol and other kind of stress hormones that may be higher after someone's kind of been lonely or kind of chronic loneliness. And changes the neurochemistry of the brain to turning off kind of dopamine neurons and making it kind of harder to feel joy, even if there are kind of inputs that may trigger joy historically after kind of being lonely for a number of years or kind of significant length of time, even if there are kind of triggers that may normally trigger joy, the person is like no longer able to experience it. And I think like typically is studied more in older adults, and it can often, there's some research showing that it can increase like likelihood of mild cognitive impairment transitioning into dementia. So there's kind of, there's a number of different things I think across the lifespan